Hello everyone and welcome to Fellowship Church. I'm Ross, the student pastor here at Fellowship, and here are a couple announcements we have for you today. First, the Middletown Community Thanksgiving Drive is kicking off its serving days this weekend, and our atrium and auditorium will be filled with donated food to support over 1,100 families. Because Sunday is one of those serving days, our Sunday services will be held down in the LP student building. Our children's environments will still be open in their regular setting, and if you park in the upper lot, feel free to walk through the main building to get down to the lower. Next, we're excited to have child dedications on Sunday, December 1st. We like to do this a couple times a year, and for those wondering, this is a meaningful opportunity where parents dedicate their children to God, publicly committing to guide them in a growing relationship with Jesus. During this special moment, parents will bring their children forward, and Pastor Andy will pray over these families. For more details and information about child dedications or to sign up, please fill out a connection card and just make sure to write child dedication somewhere on that card. Save the date for our third annual Jingle Jam on Saturday, December 7th at 4 p.m. This is a Christmas celebration big enough for the whole family. Once again, we'll have an interactive Christmas experience filled with memorable music, skits, games, and the Christmas story. Something new we'll be doing at this year's Jingle Jam is a tree lighting. This will be down in our courtyard area with hot chocolate and Christmas carols. It's going to be a whole lot of holiday fun that you definitely don't want to miss, so make sure you mark it on your calendar. Finally, as always, we just want to say a huge thank you for your generosity. This church family goes above and beyond, not just in tithes and offerings, but in so many ways. You supported the Costa Rica missions team by buying so many wreaths. Every box for Operation Christmas Child was taken, which is amazing because we usually have extras. And you've been donating food for the Thanksgiving Project. It's truly something special to be part of such a generous church, and we hope you feel the same way. If you'd like to give today, whether for the first time or as part of your regular giving, you can do so online or by using the giving box as you leave the auditorium. Thank you and enjoy.
We love our shows that involve judges, don't we? I mean, you think about it. A lot of us like The Voice or American Idol, or maybe it's the Hell's Kitchen or Barbecue Showdown. I mean, you name it. And who can forget Judge Judy, right? And we even have shows that vote people off islands, for crying out loud. But our judging doesn't stop there, does it? We judge people's parking and driving skills on the regular. We're quick to size people up without realizing and really knowing a whole lot about them. And a favorite pastime these days, we even have a term for it. It's called people watching. Remember that? Back in the day when the malls were popular, we would go there, but you could people watch almost anywhere these days. And listen, technology has only fueled this impulse in our lives, you know? We can judge all kinds of things that we see online. Somebody likes an article that you disagree with. Something inside of you recoils a little bit. They vote for a candidate you don't like. What happens? You start judging them. And it's really easy to slip into cancel culture or to gossip or to thinking the worst about people. And most of the time when it comes to judging, it involves propping ourselves up at the expense of someone else. We kind of leave that feeling with an air of superiority compared to the other person. Oh, at least I'm not like them, or I can't believe that they would do this. The long and the short of it is this. We are all judgment machines, right? I mean, why do we do this? Well, for starters, it can make us feel better about ourselves, right? We can kind of feel a little superior, feel a little better about ourselves until we're on the other side. Have you ever been attacked or criticized in some way? Maybe it's at work. Somebody challenges maybe your work ethic or the quality of the projects that you do. Maybe you're at school and you've been bullied at school and people have cast judgments and just saying, you're different than the rest of us. Some of us, I know, have had our family has just cut us off. And for some reason we know, and other reasons we really don't know. All that to say is this: forgiveness and grace, well, they're at an all-time low, it seems, these days. Now, Jesus, thank God, speaks into this in his famous Sermon on the Mount with one of his most relevant, and I would say this, one of his most misunderstood statements. And it's found in Matthew 7, verse 1. Jesus says, "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged." You know, we love that verse a lot of times, especially if we're on the receiving end of judgment, right? We say things like, "Who are you to judge me?" Right? Jesus says don't judge. We're not supposed to judge anybody. But when we think about it, is this really what Jesus meant? Like no judgment ever in any situation? I mean, does he mean that we can never really judge something that's morally right or wrong? Does it mean, teachers can no longer judge quality of work on students? Can a jury no longer hold people accountable for a crime? Yeah, of course not, because even later Jesus would tell his followers to beware of false prophets. Well, the only way you can do that is by having a little judgment and discernment in your life to be able to find out what's going on there. And think about our kids. We all want our kids to grow up knowing that difference between right and wrong, because we know that life goes better for them and for those that they love. So what is Jesus talking about here? Well, what's really important is context. It's always important in the Bible because you could always pull a verse out and have it say almost whatever you want it to say. But the context of this statement is found in the previous chapter that Jesus had just been talking about, and he'd been talking about the danger of hypocrisy. And so this same theme flows directly from that. Here's the genius of Jesus. He always gets to the heart of the matter. And isn't it ironic that most wrong judgment focuses primarily, if not entirely, far away from the heart, on the outside? And this leads us into why Jesus instructs us not to judge. We don't always know the whole story. Isn't that true? You know this. In judgment, we tend to accuse the other person, yet a lot of times we excuse ourselves because we know our motivations. We judge their motives, or worse, we simply just dismiss some people in our lives. But here's the thing. We're never called to devalue people. Matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. We're called to bless people, to treat them with dignity and worth, even if they think or say things different than us. And Jesus did this all the time. He spoke to people others had given up on. And this is also why Jesus said earlier on our talk on anger a couple weeks ago, to not call people idiots, that even that is devaluing. So it's important for us to take time to understand people's stories. We kind of know this, but usually people's stories give us a reason why some of them act out the way that they do. And guys, let's be honest. We all know this. There's a lot of brokenness in this world, and there always has been. So how many times do we judge people's motives when only God truly does this correctly? Here's what I love about God's judgment. God's judgment is perfectly accurate. God's judgment is loving and it's wise. It's compassionate beyond measure. And God's judgment is always done in the context of grace and truth. When we really grapple with and understand the grace that God has shown us, it really helps us to lead with humility and curiosity rather than condemnation and pride. And that's usually where most judgment lands. So let's be honest. It's by the grace of God that you and me are even here today. So this leads us to the next truth. When we judge unfairly, we're inviting God's judgment on ourselves. Jesus goes on to say in verse 2, "For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged." So here's the question that we all need to ask. How harshly do I want God to judge me? What standard do I want God to use on me? Last I checked, I need all the forgiveness and mercy that I can get. As a matter of fact, I'm really counting on it. Earlier in his sermon, Jesus had stated a profound truth. He said, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." So the question is, how merciful are you to people who are different than you, who vote different than you, who annoy the snot out of you? Jesus is elevating here the grace of God in this statement, because we already said that he judges perfectly for us. The world would be a much worse place, and he's trying to put us, let us see this face to face, that if we were in the seat of God, how much trouble that would actually be. So let's rise to the compassion and wisdom of God. And we do this by blessing and being a blessing to others. And part of this is really waking up to the reality that you and I, we all have these blind spots ourselves. And this is really what Jesus is getting at here. He always wants us to be introspective before we start working with other people. And he unpacks this in the following verses, in verse 3 through 5. He says, "And why are you worrying about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own?" Now, he's using a hyperbole here to make a point. It's kind of absurd and silly, but he's trying to make a point. How can you think of saying to your friend, "Let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye," when you can't see past the log in your own eye? And then he says this key word, and it's so important. He says, hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. Remember earlier in chapter 6, he was talking about hypocrisy, and here he is drilling down on it again. Now, just this past week, I had my annual eye exam, and man, I go through a whole battery of tests with my eyes. And by the time they were done, they had put so many different things into my eyes, and I had run so many tests. They said, be careful when you walk outside in the sunny, out in the sunny day. Make sure that you have some sunglasses. And sure enough, I walked out there. My pupils were so dilated, I couldn't see a thing. I had to kind of feel my way through the parking lot and hope nobody hit me to find my vehicle. And then when I finally got home, I was just blurry for hours afterwards. It was I couldn't read anything. I couldn't really see anything without just seeing this blurriness around my eyes. A lot of times we go through life and we think we have 20/20 vision when it comes to judgment in people. We think we have it all understood, that we have it all figured out. Yet the truth is we've got issues with our own eyes, with our own heart, with our own mind. And as absurd as Jesus' illustration is, and it really is, it's meant to be just this funny picture. It's that absurd. And this is Jesus' point. It's that absurd for us to cast judgment on people most of the time. Now, how many times, you think about it, do I get angry for how someone else drives, only soon to find out that I do the same very exact thing? I mean, I've got my own issues. What am I doing? Calling people names, driving, letting them drive me crazy. I'm doing the same things they're doing, but yet mine tend to be justified, right? When someone offends me or I feel does something unfair, my impulse is to judge them, to label them, to dismiss them. And in doing so, though, you know what we always do when we do that? We dehumanize people. And honestly, guys, that's the easy way out. That's the lazy way out. It doesn't take any energy to write somebody off. The more difficult way is to practice long suffering. When I'm willing to suffer or be inconvenienced with a relationship in my life, when I'm willing to put up with others' flaws with the hope that I might have a relationship with them, it's all about giving people second and third chances. It's about repairing relationships in a healthy manner. And it's being willing to just be a little vulnerable, to expose your heart one more time with the hope that maybe, just maybe, we can relate in a different way. Of course, this leads to this all-encompassing, important question: how much should we long suffer, right? Well, that's where a lot of wisdom comes in and a lot of discernment there as well. I mean, if someone is out to intentionally hurt you, well, obviously we're not opening ourselves up to that. But let's be honest. Most of the time, it's dealing with imperfect people where we need to extend just a little more grace. So again, it doesn't mean, and when Jesus is talking about this, he's not saying throw discernment out the window, but it does mean that we become peacemakers rather than peacekeepers. It's about, this needs to be addressed, but I'm not to judge, so I don't want to get near it. And then we just walk around on eggshells the whole time. That's not helpful. We need to wade into sometimes some conversations. Think about it as parents, right? Parents, it's your job to make wise judgment with your children, especially like these days with screen time, right? I mean, recently there has been a ton of research out there about the danger of too much screen time. So you as parent have to show some judgment and to set up some boundaries. And friends, we're all to sharpen one another like iron sharpens iron. So this is an important question. How do we do that? How do we do that without disobeying what Jesus said here? How do we do this with the right heart and the right mindset? Well, let me give you a few things to think about. The first one is this. And honestly, this is what Jesus was getting at. And it's a consistent theme throughout his whole Sermon on the Mount. And it's this: judge yourself first, right? That's where he says, get rid of the log in your own eye. When it comes to blind spots, those that are closest to you are really acutely aware of them. And that's why we need to be in relationship with people who are for us, who care for us. I mean, let's face it, none of us are perfect. None of us has arrived. It reminds me of what Dr. Henry Cloud said when it comes to spiritual growth. He said the goal of spiritual growth, it's really not perfection. It's becoming increasingly aware of weaknesses and sins and then making those constant corrections and adjustments throughout our lives. Here at Fellowship, we have a term for it. We call it moving up and to the right. And honestly, we never fully arrive. Yet the Holy Spirit, which is so great, he's always patiently working. He's patiently pursuing and prodding and reminding us. Now, on the other side of this, some of us are slow also to receive God's grace in our lives. And we're pretty harsh judges of ourselves. I was once sharing something with my counselor, and he stopped and he asked me, I was getting kind of hard on myself. And he says, do you talk to other people in the same way that you talk to yourself? And I was like, well, no, I don't think I'd have any people in my life if I did that. And he says, yeah, you might want to take a time out from that and think about how you speak to yourself. And he was showing me the correlation of this in our life. And I may not speak harshly to people the way that I do to myself, but what I came to find out is that it did lead me to be less patient with them, sometimes to be less forgiving of them. And so we have to be careful with this. We have to understand and be appropriate with our walk with God and be healthy with that. So for some of us, maybe the pathway is becoming easier on yourself, and that'll allow you to be a little easier and more fair with others. Another thing we can do is really embrace God's grace and truth in our lives. Once we've right-sized ourselves a little bit and have developed some self-awareness and some humility, we can make wise judgments about other fellow believers who need some help. And this is kind of where it always gets sticky, right? You're just like, well, we're called not to judge. Let's not judge. Now, so there's a lot of clarity in the New Testament about this. And the big piece to this is that we're not called as Christians to judge people outside who are not followers of Jesus. But we are called to be in relationship with those who are. So this sometimes involves what we would call showing some discernment. So let me go to 1 Corinthians 5:12. Paul writes to the church and he says this: it isn't my responsibility to judge outsiders. He's talking about people outside church, but it certainly is your responsibility to judge those inside the church who are sinning. Now, again, we want the attitude of Jesus with this, and we want consistency of message through this. This is where we get true context. So Paul is not talking about legalism here. He's not talking about all this boundary marking and all these things and list making and stuff. Paul's talking about living in such authentic relationship with each other that we're able to invite feedback from people that we do life with here within our own church family. And honestly, it takes intentional relationship to do this. It takes courage. And it takes a certain amount of maturity to do this, to give permission for people to call you up. And I say call you up, not call you out, because there's a difference between a coach speaking into your life and then just simply a critic. You know, the coach is for you. They want the best for you. The critic is in it for themselves and for their own pride. So to give permission to others to call you up when they see dangerous patterns in your life can actually be a gift. It can be life-giving, and it can be relationship-saving. Whether it's, them sensing and seeing a critical spirit in your heart, or a harsh word and tone that you seem to be carrying with you, or maybe too much worry and wanting to control a situation, or even your own judgmental spirit. See, the key is that this must always be done in the context of a spirit of humility, not condemnation. So it's best when permission is given, when you actually invite people to do this and they do the same. Because we all know that unasked for advice is almost always perceived as criticism, right? So to wrap things up, let me ask you a few questions. One question might be this: where am I failing to live up to the standard that I expect from others? Again, I think what Jesus is getting at with this judging is that we need to be introspective first. And part of that also is the second question: how do I currently benefit from the patience and the grace of God and others in my own life? And then finally, who in my life could I give permission to help me see some of my own blind spots? See, I think what God calls us to in relationship is that he wants us to live humbly just like Jesus did. And that's the heart of true discernment. It comes from a spirit of humility. Think about what our relationships could look like if we lived this way, with these priorities, instead of a spirit of condemnation. So are we to judge and use discernment? Yeah, at times we are. But if it's all about condemning and it's all about pride in our own heart, then we need to take a pass on that. And we need to take a look at ourselves first. So with all that said, may we as Jesus followers lovingly resist a culture that we live in these days of canceling each other by humbly extending grace and blessing to each other. Guys, we've all been abundantly blessed by God. Let's return the favor by being a blessing to others. And I hope that this helps your relationships. God bless you.